Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Lowland Greenhouse here at Carlton Carnivores. I'm doing another plant spotlight for you guys today, and it's another species similar to the one that I did in my last video. Last video was Byblis liniflora, one of the common rainbow plants, and this one is possibly a very close relative to liniflora, but also at the same time an extremely distinct plant altogether. That is Byblis aquatica. Now if I bring this up close to the screen here, you guys can see it more or less. Just like liniflora, this is a small, very slender plant. It has a slightly more scrambling growth habit than liniflora does, and that owes partly to the environment that it tends to live in. Byblis liniflora and most of the other Byblis tend to be plants that live on the edges of seeps and waterways where the soil gets moist, but it never really gets wet, and they like it fairly sandy, well-draining, and so on. Aquatica, as you might guess from the name, is a little bit different. Now, this species is found in kind of two disjunct areas, one on the very northern end of Queensland on the Cape York Peninsula, and then also in the region around Darwin in the Northern Territory of Australia. So where it is found in both of those places is actually generally within shallow wetland areas that are wet during the rainy season and then dry out during the summer. Up in the Cape York Peninsula, they may actually grow alongside a Nepenthes species. But where these guys grow, they will actually be found where there's actually oftentimes a couple inches to maybe a foot or so of water, and sometimes you'll even find them growing on floating mats of dead vegetation or peat that's floated up. So they actually grow in extremely wet conditions, unlike most of their relatives. And how they survive that partly is due to their scrambling habit. These guys get a little bigger than liniflora, while liniflora usually doesn't exceed more than 6 to 8 inches tall usually. These guys will grow to a foot, foot and a half tall, 45 centimeters. And as they grow, and as you can kind of see here, they'll start out upright, but then as the plant gets bigger, eventually it's not able to support itself, so the base kind of flops over. And so in water, that's okay because their long spindly leaves just kind of leave them floating on top of the surface of the water, and that gives them support even in space where there's nothing else growing around them. And then the top of the plant continues growing upward and can capture insects and bloom and so on. This species is fairly distinct from all of its relatives as well in how its glands are arranged. Most other species have kind of variable size of tentacles, from really small to fairly long ones that stick out across the entire plant. Aquatica, like its relatives, has sticky glands that are all over the plant, the stems, the leaves, and everything, but they are extremely small, very, very short, and they only barely stick up off of the surface of the plant. So it is quite distinct looking from all the others because it is a lot more smooth, a lot more uniform looking, and doesn't look as chaotic as a lot of the other Byblis tend to, with their much longer and more variably sized tentacles. Also fairly distinct for the species. Some others will sometimes blush a little bit red. You'll find certain forms of Rorida or filifolia that may have kind of red stems or a slight red tint in the leaves. Aquatica, other than there has been an anthocyanin-free population located in Queensland, but otherwise, a lot of different forms of this species actually develop a very rich red to maroon color. The variety that I'm growing, that I've got in my hand here, I received labeled as fine form red plants, so it's got a little bit skinnier stem, very, very thin leaves, and under good lighting, it turns this deep red coloration. And this plant in particular, on the ends of the leaves, is showing a lot of that. So it is a nice reddish plant. And once it's mature, of course, it will start producing its beautiful flowers. Its relative liniflora has slightly larger and usually kind of pale pinkish or purple flowers. Most of the other species also have somewhat similar colorations. Aquatica, though, both of the forms that I grow, this and my robust form, and most of the other photos that I've seen of this species, the flowers are a deep electric purple coloration, so quite different from its relatives. And also, like liniflora, this is a species that can self-pollinate, unlike most of the rest of the genus. Pollen from the same plant can go on the same flower, and it will produce viable seeds, and it doesn't seem to have any sort of real inbreeding effect that it experiences when those seeds grow out. However, unlike liniflora, which will pollinate on its own, aquatica does have, it seems to be set up where it requires manual pollination. So that does encourage cross-pollination like in the other species, and of course it's better for genetic variability overall. But this species does require manual pollination in order to set seeds if it is to be self-pollinated. Now it's fairly easy to do that. Like all species in genus, these guys have these tiny little clusters of anthers that have a hole right at the end, and in cultivation, you can just take a toothpick or a little brush and flick those anthers to kind of coax the pollen out. In the wild, that pollen will be released by insects visiting the flowers and buzz pollinating the plant. Their vibrating wings releasing the pollen, dusting the insect, and then the insect flies off and deposits that on the stigma of another plant. But it is quite an interesting little species. Certainly, I actually like it more than the common liniflora because of those rich colorations. It's a little more robust, a little stockier and larger than liniflora often is, and of course that beautiful coloration. It is, however, still quite uncommon in cultivation, partly because despite its wet habitat in the wild, this species is, like most of its relatives, a fire-adapted plant. It's also, interestingly, a slightly water-adapted plant because when those flowers mature and produce their seed pods, unlike the other species where they eventually dry and crack open and release their seeds, these guys generally, those pods, often don't open up until they are exposed to moisture. So when the rains come through and the area that they grow in is flooded, those pods are submerged and they swell and crack open then and release the seeds into the flooded environment. At the same time, hopefully, these plants will have had fire go through that area beforehand, and when those waters come through, they carry the chemicals in the ash from the smoke in with them, because like its relatives, its seeds require some sort of treatment to actually germinate. In the wild, it's that smoke, those ash chemicals that react with the germination inhibitors in the seed to allow the seed to germinate. In cultivation, I simply use a gibberellic acid solution, 500 parts per million. You soak the seeds for 24 hours in that and then sow on the soil surface and they germinate. You can also get smoke water or smoke-infused paper tablets as well, and that will also work. But it is a fairly easy species to grow once you've treated the seeds to germinate. Because of their wet growing habit, they aren't really all that picky about soil. You can grow them in the same kind of sandy, loose soils that the other Byblis species will grow in, and that's kind of what I've got here, kind of a 1-to-1-to-1 perlite sand and peat moss mix. But you could also grow this species in almost pure peat, and it would be fine with that because they can tolerate those really wet, dense soils as well. So, to grow them best, they are, again, they're from northern Australia, so they live in a very, very warm tropical environment. Their best growth is going to be when it is hot out. So if you can keep the environment they are in 80 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit all the time, that is when they will sprout the fastest, and they will also grow the fastest. As an annual plant, of course, also, they're fairly heavy feeders. So these guys just kind of catch the fungus gnats that are in the greenhouse here for me. But they will also, you can tolerate, or they will tolerate if you put an Osmocote pellet down into the pot, one only per pot. That will also release nutrients that these guys will actually take up. You can also feed them with dilute fertilizers that are suitable carnivores, or throw fruit flies or bloodworms onto the leaves as well. Feed them well, and then of course make sure to manually pollinate their flowers when they produce them, and you'll get lots of seeds and be able to keep them going for the next generation. So that is what I've got for that species right now. The other species that I have growing on are a little bit slower, and they were a bit later to the party to start. So it may be a while before I do a video on them, but I do have plans to cover the other Byblis eventually. If you enjoy watching videos like this, learning about these different species, how to grow them, where they're found, and so on, what makes them tick, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything coming up. If you got questions, anything that I missed about this species or something else, comments you'd like to make sure to leave those in the comments below the video. If you'd like to learn more, there's the database and blog that are on my website at carltoncarnivores.com. I'm always posting photos and videos and such on social media, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Carlton Carnivores. If you'd like to support the production of these videos, because it does take a bit to put these together, edit the videos, and so on, do consider maybe buying the plants or seeds that I have available on the website at Carlton Carnivores. The shop is linked on there. I do often have Byblis seeds available. I have aquatica and guehoi right now available on the site, and liniflora probably soon. Otherwise, you can also join as a Patreon member at patreon.com/hcarlton, where you can get monthly access to the seed contests that I do, giving things out that I don't have available on the website or that are particularly expensive, and you get a chance at them for a little cheaper. And you also get early access to the videos and other givebacks as well. Or you can also donate at Ko-fi, but however you choose to support, even if it's just watching the videos, watching them all the way through, that does help the channel a great deal. But until next time, I'm Håkon Carlton, and this is Carlton Carnivores.